She was a ghost in scrubs, haunted by a limp that announced her presence long before she arrived. He was the king of the emergency room, a doctor whose arrogance was sharper than any scalpel. When Gunmen took the hospital, he saw her as a liability. They all did. But they didn't know the woman they called Nurse Sharma once had another name, a name whispered in fear by America's enemies. Now, let me take you inside the longest hour at Mercy General Hospital. Anya Sharma hated the linoleum. It was the sound, mostly, the specific, rhythmic, squeak-drag-squeak of her own footfalls. One foot, a clean, quiet press. The other, a reluctant accomplice, dragging a fraction of a second too long, the rubber sole complaining against the polished floor with every single step. Squeak drag, squeak drag. It was the soundtrack of her new life. A constant, humiliating reminder of the old one. In the cacophony of the Mercy General ER, it was a sound no one should have noticed. The urgent beeping of monitors, the hiss of oxygen tanks, the clipped, stressed voices of doctors and nurses, the moans of the sick and the injured. It was a symphony of controlled chaos. Yet, somehow, her limp cut through it all. At least, it did for him. "Sharma, move it!" The voice belonged to Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Emergency Medicine. It was a voice as sterile and sharp as a brand new scalpel, and he wielded it with the same surgical imprecision, cutting away at the confidence of his staff until only raw nerves remained. Anya didn't look up. Her focus was on the patient in Bay 3, a young man whose motorcycle had tried to merge with a city bus. His breathing was shallow, his blood pressure was plummeting, and his leg was bent at an angle nature had never intended. Her hands moved with an economy of motion that belied the awkwardness of her gait. She was checking the IV line, adjusting the morphine drip, her eyes scanning the telemetry with a focus so intense the rest of the world seemed to blur at the edges. "Did you hear me, Sharma?" Finch was closer now. She could smell his cologne, an expensive, cloying scent that always seemed to be fighting a losing battle against the antiseptic smell of the hospital. "We have a chest pain in Bay 5 that needs an EKG, and you're moving like you're wading through cement." She didn't flinch. She finished securing the patient's line and made a quick note on his chart. Her handwriting was as precise as her movements, small, blocky, and perfectly legible. "Dr. Chen is already on it," she said, her voice quiet, almost flat. "I'm stabilizing the MVA." Finch loomed over her, a tall man who used his height as another tool of intimidation. His scrubs were immaculately pressed, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He looked less like a doctor who worked in the trenches of an urban ER, and more like an actor playing one on television. He glanced at the patient, then back at Anya, his lips curling into a sneer of performative pity. "Stabilizing, or taking a scenic tour," he gestured vaguely at her leg. "We all appreciate your perseverance, nurse, but this is an emergency room. The emphasis is on emergency, speed, urgency, qualities that seem to be challenging for you." The nurses and orderlies around them fell silent. Heads bowed, eyes studiously avoided the confrontation. They had all been on the receiving end of Finch's public humiliations. It was a management technique. Keep them off balance, keep them afraid, and they would work harder. Or so he believed. Anya felt the familiar heat rise in her chest, a cold, controlled fury that she had learned to cage long ago. She met his gaze. Her eyes were a dark, unreadable brown. She didn't defend herself. She didn't make excuses. She simply held his gaze until he was the one to look away, uncomfortable with the sheer, unnerving stillness she projected. "The patient is stable," she repeated. Her voice was a low murmur, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "His pressure is coming up. He's ready for transport to imaging." Finch scoffed, a little puff of air that dismissed her competence, her assessment, her very presence. He turned to a younger nurse, a woman named Chloe, who looked terrified. "Chloe, get in here, finish up with this and get Sharma a coffee. Maybe that will put some life back in her." He walked away, leaving a wake of silence and resentment. Chloe scurried over, her face a mask of apology. "Anya, I'm so sorry. He's the chief," Anya finished for her, her tone giving nothing away. She squeezed Chloe's shoulder gently. "Don't worry about it. Just watch his femur. Any sign of swelling, you page ortho immediately. Suspect compartment syndrome." She turned and walked away. Squeak drag, squeak drag. Each step was a small act of defiance. The limp was from an IED outside Kandahar. Shrapnel had shredded the muscles and nerves in her left thigh, leaving her with a permanent, grating pain and a leg that didn't always obey her commands. The Navy doctors had done their best, piecing her back together with titanium and grit, but they couldn't restore the fluid grace she once possessed. They couldn't give her back her old life, the life of Spectre. The name felt like it belonged to another person now, a ghost. Spectre was a Navy SEAL, a sniper, a woman who could lie motionless for 72 hours in the freezing mud, who could control her heart rate until it was a slow, steady drum, who could place a single round into a target from over a mile away in a crosswind. Spectre moved like smoke, a whisper in the tall grass. Anya Sharma moved with a limp. She reached the nurse's station, the central hub of the ER's chaotic universe. The institutional beige walls were covered in charts, notices, and the faint, greasy residue of 1,000 hurried meals. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and bleach. She poured herself a cup of the sludge that passed for coffee, the warmth of the cheap styrofoam cup a small comfort in her cold hands. She leaned against the counter, the position taking some of the weight off her bad leg. From here, she could see the entire ER. It was her perch, her hide. From here, she observed, she saw everything. The way a junior resident's hands trembled slightly as he stitched a laceration. The subtle pallor of the woman in Bay 7 that signaled she was about to code long before the monitor did. The flicker of fear in a child's eyes and the exhausted relief in his mother's. She saw the patterns, the rhythms of life and death playing out in fast forward. And she saw Finch. He was holding court near the ambulance bay, laughing with a group of hospital board members. A different man now, charming, polished. He pointed out the new trauma bays he had championed, taking credit for a grant proposal one of his residents had written. He was a human shield made of silence and authority, deflecting any real work while absorbing all the glory. Corruption, she thought, didn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wore a tailored suit and a confident smile. A new announcement crackled over the intercom, a female voice trying to sound professional over the feedback. Attention staff, a reminder that General Marcus Thorne will be arriving at 1400 hours for his tour of the facility and the Wounded Warrior Project dedication. Please extend every courtesy. Anya's shoulders tensed like an internal switch had been flipped. General Thorne, 4-star, head of Special Operations Command for the last 5 years of her service. She had never met him personally, but she knew his name. Everyone in her world knew his name. He was a legend, a soldier's soldier, who had come up through the ranks of the Rangers and Delta Force. He was not a man who suffered fools. He was not a man who liked polished surfaces. He liked results. Finch would be insufferable. She took a sip of her coffee. It was bitter. She watched as Finch preened for the board members, his gestures becoming more expansive, his voice louder. He was preparing for his big moment, for the photo op with a real-life war hero. Anya closed her eyes for a moment. She just had to get through the shift. 4 more hours. 4 more hours of the squeak drag, of Finch's condescension, of the ghosts that whispered in the quiet moments. Then she could go home to her small, empty apartment, where the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. She opened her eyes, and the world ended. It began not with a bang, but with a sound that didn't belong, a heavy, metallic clank from the main entrance. It was the sound of a magnetic lock engaging out of sequence, a hard, final sound. Then came the screaming. It started at the front, a wave of pure panic that rolled through the waiting room and crashed into the ER itself. People were shouting, scrambling, tripping over chairs. A security guard near the entrance raised his hand, his mouth open to shout a command, but the word never came out. A pop. It was a small sound, almost lost in the noise. Not the booming report of a handgun she had heard 100 times in training, but the suppressed cough-like report of a professional weapon. The guard crumpled. A single dark flower bloomed on the chest of his light blue uniform. Anya didn't scream. She didn't run. She moved. She didn't think. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Years of muscle memory overriding the civilian programming she had tried so hard to build. Her coffee cup dropped to the floor, splashing hot liquid across the linoleum. She was already pivoting, her limp momentarily forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. Her eyes scanned, cataloging, assessing. 4 men, no, 5, entering through the main doors, dressed in black tactical gear, masks covering their faces. They moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency. Not junkies, not a random act of violence. This was planned. They fanned out, 2 securing the entrance, 2 moving deeper into the ER, and 1, clearly the leader, directing them with sharp, economical hand signals. Rifles up, muzzles disciplined, not flagging wildly, but pointed deliberately at the floor or the ceiling, always ready. Professionals. "Nobody move!" The leader's voice was amplified by a small speaker in his mask, a distorted, electronic rasp. "On the floor, now! Phones out! Drop them!" Panic erupted. People cried, begged. Finch, who had been standing near the ambulance bay entrance, froze. His face, moments before so full of arrogant confidence, was now a slack mask of disbelief and terror. The board members were scrambling, trying to hide behind a gurney like frightened children. Anya was already in motion. She didn't get on the floor. That was a victim's posture. It was an invitation to be controlled. Instead, she ducked behind the curved structure of the nurse's station, using it as cover. Her heart rate wasn't frantic. It was a slow, heavy thud. Thump, 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 the combat rhythm. She had forgotten what it felt like. She peered through a gap between a computer monitor and a stack of files. Her mind was a cold, clear machine, processing data at an incredible speed. Threat assessment, 5 hostiles, black fatigues, no insignia, body armor, suppressed short-barreled rifles, likely 5.56 millimeters, sidearms visible in thigh holsters, comms in their ears. They were sweeping the room, their movements economical and practiced. They were not here to kill everyone. If they were, They would have started with indiscriminate fire. This was a targeted operation. They wanted something, or someone. She watched the leader. He moved with an authority the others lacked. He pointed at two of his men, then at the pharmacy door. They moved to breach it. He pointed at another, gesturing toward the secure ward. They were isolating the area, controlling the choke points. This was a military-style takeover, and she was a nurse with a bad leg. A cold smile touched her lips, gone as quickly as it came. That was what they saw. It was better that way. She was underestimated. It was her best and only weapon. She needed to find a weapon of her own, and she needed to get people out. Chloe, the young nurse Finch had berated, was huddled under a desk nearby, sobbing quietly. Another doctor, a resident named Ben, was trying to shield a patient with his own body. They were good people. They were going to die if someone didn't do something. Finch, on the other hand, had his hands raised high in the air. "Please," he was saying, his voice a reedy, pathetic whine. "Take whatever you want. The pharmacy is full of narcotics. Just don't hurt anyone." The leader ignored him. He walked over to the nurse's station, his rifle held at a low ready. Anya pressed herself back, making herself smaller. The man's boots stopped just feet from her hiding place. She could smell the cordite from his earlier shot and the faint scent of gun oil. She held her breath. The leader ripped a monitor from the wall and smashed it on the ground. He grabbed the hospital-wide intercom microphone. "This is a lockdown," his distorted voice boomed through the entire hospital. "No one enters, no one leaves. All communication is cut. Any attempt to contact the outside will be met with lethal force. We are in control." The message was for the rest of the hospital, for the people hiding in offices and supply closets, for General Marcus Thorne and his security detail, wherever they were. Anya's mind raced. Thorne was here, a 4-star general. He wouldn't be alone. He'd have a security team, probably 2 or 3 highly trained men. They would be armed, but they were somewhere else in this maze of a building. They were blind. They didn't know the layout, the number of hostiles, or their objective. She was their eyes. She had to be. The leader finished his broadcast and turned his attention to the terrified staff and patients huddled on the floor. "We are looking for a patient," he rasped. "Admitted this morning. John Doe. Chest pains." Anya's blood ran cold. John Doe. Bay 5. The man Finch had wanted her to run an EKG on. She had glanced at his chart. He wasn't a John Doe. He had been admitted under a pseudonym, a protected admission, usually for a VIP or a witness in police custody. Finch's eyes widened. He knew, of course he knew. As chief of medicine, he would have been briefed. The leader walked toward Finch, the rifle pointed loosely at his chest. "You, the one in charge, where is he?" Finch stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't know who you're talking about. We have dozens of patients." It was a weak lie, and the gunman knew it. He pressed the barrel of his rifle against Finch's chest, not hard, but with an intimacy that was more terrifying than a direct threat. "I am not a patient, man. The hospital administrator knows. His name is Alistair Finch. Find him for me." Finch's face went white. He swallowed hard. "I am Dr. Finch." The leader's head tilted slightly, a flicker of amusement behind the mask. "Perfect. You just saved me some time. Now, for the last time, where is John Doe?" From her hiding place, Anya watched Finch's resolve crumble like sand. He was a bully, not a leader. His courage was a thin veneer, and it had just been stripped away. His eyes darted around the ER, landing on Bay 5. It was a flicker, a momentary betrayal, but Anya saw it, and the gunmen saw it too. Bay 5, the leader said, a statement, not a question. He gestured with his head. Two of his men broke off and started walking toward the curtained-off area. Anya knew she had seconds. The man in that bed was a dead man. And then, once they had him, the gunmen would have no more use for witnesses. She had to create a diversion, something loud, something chaotic. Her eyes scanned the nurse's station, syringes, gauze, monitors, keyboards, and a crash cart parked against the wall, its defibrillator paddles gleaming under the fluorescent lights. An idea sparked, a terrible, dangerous idea. She moved silently, a predator in the concrete jungle of the ER. Her limp was a liability she couldn't afford, so she compensated, shifting her weight, moving with a fluid crouch she hadn't used in years. She reached the crash cart. Her fingers closed around the heavy plastic paddles. She cranked the charge dial all the way up, 360 joules. The machine let out a high-pitched whine as it charged, a rising, insistent scream of stored energy. Every head in the room snapped toward the sound. The two gunmen heading for Bay 5 stopped, turning. The leader spun around, his rifle coming up. "What was that?" he snarled. Anya rose from behind the counter. She held the paddles in her hands, the coiled wires stretching. For a moment, no one seemed to understand what they were looking at. A nurse, a broken woman with a limp, holding defibrillator paddles. It didn't compute. "Clear!" she shouted, the single word cutting through the fear-soaked air. She didn't wait for them to react. She slammed the paddles together. The resulting crack was like a thunderclap in the enclosed space. A brilliant blue-white arc of electricity exploded between the paddles, and the air filled with the smell of ozone. The sound was deafening, primal. The two gunmen nearest to her flinched violently, instinctively raising their hands to protect their faces from the blinding flash. It was the opening she needed. 1 second, that's all she had asked for. In that 1 second, she was no longer Anya Sharma, the limping nurse. She was Spectre. She dropped the paddles and lunged, not at the gunmen, but sideways. She grabbed the edge of a heavy metal supply cart, filled with saline bags and steel instruments. Using her body weight, she shoved it with all her might. It careened across the floor, aimed directly at the legs of the two distracted gunmen. It hit them with a brutal, clattering crash of metal on shin. One went down with a grunt of pain. The other stumbled, his rifle wavering. Anya was already moving past them. "Chloe! Ben! Bay 5! Go!" she yelled, her voice a commander's bark, not a nurse's plea. The young nurse and the resident, startled out of their terror, looked at her, then at each other, and then they scrambled toward the John Doe's bed. The leader recovered first. He was good, very good. He didn't panic. He raised his rifle and fired a short, controlled burst. Not at Anya, but at the ceiling above her. Plaster and dust rained down. "Stay where you are!" he roared. But Anya was already gone, disappearing behind the curtain of another trauma bay. She was a ghost again, melting into the environment. She had bought the John Doe a few precious seconds, and she had announced her presence. She was no longer a civilian. She was a combatant. A cage of her own paranoia had just become her hunting ground. Hidden behind the thin fabric curtain, she pressed her back against the cold wall. Her heart was a piston now. Thump, thump, thump. Her breath was steady. She catalogued her assets. No weapon. One bad leg. Intimate knowledge of the terrain. and 5 heavily armed men who now knew there was a fox in the henhouse. She risked a peek through a small gap in the curtain. The leader was furious. He was shouting at his men, his voice a low, vicious growl. The one who had fallen was getting back up, limping. The other was helping him. The element of surprise was gone. Finch was babbling, pointing a shaking finger in her direction. "It was her, that nurse, Sharma. She did it. She's crazy." The leader stalked over to Finch and backhanded him across the face. The sound was a wet, ugly slap. Finch fell to the floor, whimpering. "Shut up," the leader hissed. He turned to his men. "Find her and get me the target, now." Anya slipped out the back of the trauma bay into a short corridor that led to the staff locker rooms. She needed a weapon, even a small one, an equalizer. She found one on a discarded lunch tray, a steak knife, cheap serrated steel, but it would have to do. She wrapped the handle in gauze for a better grip. She could hear the gunmen moving through the ER, more cautiously now. They were checking bays, kicking open doors. They were hunting her. Good. Let them hunt. She moved deeper into the hospital's labyrinthine corridors. She knew this place. She knew the supply closets that didn't lock properly, the maintenance tunnels that weren't on the official blueprints, the camera blind spots. Finch's negligence and budget cuts were now her allies. The broken security camera in the west corridor, the fire door whose alarm had been malfunctioning for months. She needed to get a message to Thorne. He was her only real hope for a resolution that didn't end in a massacre. But how? The phones were down. The network was cut. Security cameras. The main security office was on the first floor, right next to the ER. It would be one of the first places they secured. But there was a secondary monitoring station, a small, forgotten closet on the 3rd floor, in the oncology wing. Finch had ordered it shut down to save money, but the wiring was still live. The janitors used it to store floor polishers. If she could get there, she might be able to access the internal feed. It was a long shot, and it was 3 floors up. 3 floors of stairs she would have to take. Each step would be agony on her leg. She didn't hesitate. She found a stairwell and started to climb. The concrete steps were cold and unforgiving. With each upward movement, a sharp, searing pain shot from her thigh to her hip. Squeak drag became drag thump, drag thump. She ignored the pain. Pain was just data. You acknowledge it, you analyze it, and you file it away. You don't let it command you. She reached the 3rd floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps, sweat plastering her scrubs to her skin. The oncology wing was eerily silent. The lockdown announcement had sent everyone into hiding. She found the janitor's closet. The door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled of ammonia and old dust. In the corner, behind a rusty buffer, was the old security console. A single monitor, a keyboard, and a tower. It was ancient, but it had power. She flicked it on. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy black and white grid of camera feeds. Most were dark. The gunmen had been thorough, but not thorough enough. A few were still active. A camera in a hallway, one in the cafeteria, and one, miraculously, in the administrative suite where the VIPs were supposed to have been meeting. The feed was live. It showed the inside of a large conference room, and there, in the center of the room, was General Marcus Thorne. He wasn't hiding. He was standing, arms crossed, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who were clearly his security detail. They had taken cover behind a massive oak table, their sidearms drawn. They were trapped, but they were ready. Anya felt a surge of relief. He was alive. He was ready for a fight, Now she had to talk to him. But how? The system had no audio, no way to send a message. She could only watch. She looked at the camera feeds again. There had to be a way. A signal. Something only he would understand. Something that would tell him there was a friendly operator on the inside. Her eyes fell on the camera feed for the East Wing corridor near the surgical suites. The camera was active, and in the hallway, a single fluorescent light was flickering erratically. A maintenance issue, an annoyance, an opportunity. The light was controlled by a breaker box in a nearby utility closet. If she could get to it, she could control the flicker. She could turn it into a message, Morse code. It was an old language, a language of ghosts and spies. But every soldier, especially in special operations, knew the basics. It was a crazy risk. She'd have to leave the relative safety of the closet and move through the hallways. But it was the only way. If you were Anya, trapped and outgunned, would you risk exposing your position to send a blind message, hoping a single person on the other end would understand? Or would you stay hidden and try to survive on your own? For Anya, there was no choice. Survival wasn't enough. She had to win. She took the steak knife, tucked it into her waistband, and slipped back out into the silent hallway. The utility closet was 50 yards away, 50 yards of exposed, brightly lit corridor. She moved in a low crouch, using the shadows cast by empty gurneys parked against the wall. The hospital, once a place of healing, was now a tactical map of cover and concealment. Every corner was a potential ambush point. Every sound was a potential threat. She reached the closet. The door was locked. Standard maintenance lock. She pulled a bobby pin from her hair, a habit she'd never broken, and went to work. The lock was cheap, simple. It clicked open in under 10 seconds. Inside was a wall of gray metal breaker boxes. She scanned the labels, handwritten and faded. East Wing corridor lighting. There it was, a single, heavy-duty black switch. She took a deep breath. She had to get the timing right. The message had to be clear, concise, and unmistakable. She began to flick the switch. On, off, on, off, on, off, S, on, off, on, off, on, off, O, on, off, on, off, S, SOS. The universal call for help. Too generic. It could be a coincidence. She needed something more, something specific. She switched to a different code, a call sign. Dot dash, dot dot, L, dot, E, dot, dot, H, dash, dot, D, dot, I, dash, dot, C, dash, O, dot, dash, N, Leticon, level high, direct contact, now. A highly specific SOCOM signal requesting immediate communication from a lone operative behind enemy lines. It was obscure, decades old, a relic from a time before encrypted radios. It was the kind of thing they taught you once in advanced training and you never expected to use. It was a signal only a handful of people on the planet would recognize. General Marcus Thorne was one of them. Back in the conference room, Thorne was watching the same monitor. He had his team tap into the security feed the moment the lockdown happened. He was watching the flickering light, his brow furrowed. His aide, a young, sharp colonel named Evans, squinted at the screen. "Power fluctuations, sir?" Thorne didn't answer. He just watched. His eyes, accustomed to seeing patterns in chaos, traced the rhythm of the light. SOS. "Could be a civilian trying to signal," Evans murmured. Thorne held up a hand for silence. The signal stopped. Then a new pattern began. He watched, his face a granite mask, his eyes narrowed. LEHDICON. Thorne's blood went cold. He stood up straight. The change in his posture was electric. "Get me the hospital blueprints," He snapped at Evans, his voice a low, urgent command. Isolate the power grid for the East Wing corridor. Find me the source of that signal. Now. Evans stared at him. Sir? What is it? It's a ghost, Thorne said, his eyes still locked on the monitor. We have an operator on the inside. Anya didn't know if her message had been received. She could only hope. She had to get back to the ER. The John Doe was still vulnerable. Finch was a weak link who could break at any moment. She made her way back down the stairs, the pain in her leg a dull, roaring fire now. As she reached the first floor, she heard voices. 2 of the gunmen were sweeping the adjacent corridor. She flattened herself into an alcove behind a vending machine. She slowed her breathing. In, out, in, out. She became part of the shadow. The 2 men passed her hiding spot. They were complaining. This is a mess, one of them said, his voice a low grumble. Supposed to be a simple snatch and grab. In and out. Now we're hunting some crazy nurse? The boss won't be happy, the other replied. Finch was supposed to have everything handled. Security offline, target sedated and prepped for transport. We were just supposed to be the muscle. Anya's ears pricked up. Finch. He wasn't just a coward. He was a collaborator. He was in on it. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The protected patient, the conveniently timed attack, Finch's immediate attempt to give him up. The John Doe was a whistleblower, and Finch had been paid to make sure he disappeared, either on the operating table or into the hands of these men. A new kind of anger settled in her heart, not the hot fury of combat, but a cold, crystalline rage. This wasn't about war or ideology. This was about greed, about a man who had sworn an oath to do no harm, selling out a patient for money. The gunman moved on. Anya slipped from her hiding place. The game had changed. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. She moved with a new purpose. She found a janitor's closet and went inside. She wasn't looking for a weapon anymore. She was making one. Bleach, ammonia, a sealed plastic canister used for biohazard disposal. She knew the chemistry. It was a simple, brutal recipe. She poured the 2 liquids into the canister, her eyes watering from the fumes. She sealed the lid tight, a makeshift chemical grenade. It wouldn't be lethal, but it would be debilitating. It would create chaos. And chaos was her ally. She returned to the ER, moving through the periphery, a shadow in scrubs. The scene was a tense tableau. The remaining staff and patients were huddled in the center of the room. The gunmen had formed a perimeter. The leader was standing over Finch, who was on his knees now. Your little nurse is wasting my time, the leader said, prodding Finch with his boot. My patience is gone. You are going to walk into Bay 5. You are going to disconnect our target from whatever machines are keeping him alive, and you are going to wheel him out here. If you refuse, I will start executing your staff, one by one, starting with the pretty one. He gestured with his rifle at Chloe, who let out a small, terrified whimper. Finch looked at Chloe, then back at the gunman. His face was a mess of sweat and tears. He nodded pathetically. Okay, I'll do it. Just don't hurt anyone. He got to his feet, trembling, and began walking toward Bay 5. Anya knew it was time. There were no more tricks, no more hiding. This was the confrontation. She emerged from behind a bank of equipment, the biohazard canister held in her hand. She stood at the edge of the open area, the canister held low, out of sight. Her limp was pronounced, but she stood tall. Finch, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room, sharp and clear. Everyone froze. Finch stopped, his back to her. The gunmen spun around, raising their rifles. The leader's eyes, visible behind his mask, widened in surprise. "You!" he snarled. Finch turned around slowly. When he saw her, his fear was momentarily replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. "You! What are you doing? You're going to get us all killed!" "No," Anya said, her gaze locked on the leader. "He is." She pointed a single finger at Finch. "He's the one who let you in. He's the one who disabled the security protocols. He was paid to hand over a patient. Weren't you, doctor?" The leader laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Clever girl, but it doesn't matter. You're out of time." He started to raise his rifle toward her. Anya twisted the cap on the canister and threw it. It wasn't a long throw. She didn't aim for any one person. She aimed for the floor in the middle of the gunmen. It landed with a plastic clatter and began to spew a thick, yellowish cloud of vapor. Chloramine gas. The effect was instantaneous and brutal. The gunmen began to choke, their eyes streaming. They coughed, gagging, stumbling back from the noxious cloud. Their tactical discipline shattered in a moment of primal, biological panic. Anya didn't wait. She charged. She ignored the leader. She went for the weakest link, the gunman who was already limping from his encounter with the supply cart. He was disoriented, blinded, his rifle pointing at the floor. She hit him low, her shoulder driving into his hip. Her bad leg screamed in protest, but she powered through it. He went down hard. She was on him in an instant. Her left hand grabbed his rifle, twisting it away. Her right hand, holding the gauze-wrapped steak knife, found the gap in his armor between his shoulder and his neck. She didn't stab. She pressed the serrated edge against the brachial artery and pushed. It was a threat, not a kill, a demonstration. He froze, the cold steel a promise of what would come next if he moved. "Drop it," she whispered in his ear, her voice as cold as a morgue slab. He let go of the rifle. She snatched it up. The cold, familiar weight of an M4 settled into her hands. It felt like coming home. She checked the selector, safety off, semi-auto. She racked the charging handle, chambering a round. The sound was crisp, definitive. It had taken less than 5 seconds. She rose, the rifle now at her shoulder, its sight pressed against her cheek. The remaining gunmen were just recovering from the gas, their eyes red, their breathing ragged. They saw her, now armed, now a threat on their level. The leader was the first to react. He raised his own weapon. He was fast. Anya was faster. Crack. Her shot was precise. Not a kill shot, a disabling shot. The round hit the leader's rifle, just below the receiver, shattering the stock and sending splinters of polymer flying. The weapon was useless. He stared at his broken gun, then at her, a look of pure shock on his face. Crack! The second gunman's knee exploded in a spray of red. He screamed and collapsed. Crack! The third gunman had his rifle halfway up when her round took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him into a wall. 3 shots. 3 targets neutralized. Her movements were economical, her aim flawless. The limp was gone, replaced by a predator's coiled grace. She was a study in lethal efficiency. The ER was silent, save for the moans of the wounded gunmen. Only the leader and Finch were left standing. Finch was staring at her, his mouth agape. The world had turned upside down. The broken, limping nurse he had tormented was now the most dangerous person in the room. Who are you?" he whispered. Anya kept the rifle trained on the leader. I'm the person who is not letting you die today, she said, her voice flat, almost bored. It would look bad on my resume. Suddenly, a new sound, the crash of a door being breached, followed by shouts. SWAT! Police! Drop your weapons! Men in heavy armor swarmed in from the ambulance bay entrance, weapons up, red laser dots dancing across the room. The leader, unarmed, wisely raised his hands. The standoff was over. The aftermath was a controlled whirlwind. SWAT medics tended to the wounded gunmen. Officers were securing the scene, their voices calm and professional. The hostages were being led away, wrapped in blankets, their faces etched with shock and relief. Anya stood alone in the center of the chaos. She hadn't lowered the rifle. Adrenaline still coursed through her veins. She felt strangely calm. The world slowed down, the colors more vivid. Then a figure cut through the swarm of uniforms. A tall, imposing man in a pristine army dress uniform, 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders. General Marcus Thorne walked into the ER as if he were striding into the Pentagon. His aide, Colonel Evans, was a step behind him. Thorne's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with a practiced, analytical gaze. He saw the downed gunman, the cowering form of Dr. Finch, the canister still slowly leaking vapor. Then his eyes landed on Anya. He ignored everyone else. He walked directly toward her. He didn't look at the rifle in her hands. He looked at her face. Finch saw his chance. He scrambled to his feet and rushed toward the general, a sycophantic, desperate smile plastered on his face. "General, thank God you're here. It was chaos. This nurse, she went crazy. She attacked these men. She could have gotten us all killed. I had the situation under control. I was negotiating." Thorne didn't even glance at him. He walked past Finch as if he were a piece of furniture. He stopped a few feet in front of Anya. He looked at her limp, at the exhaustion in her eyes, and at the unyielding strength in her jaw. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a hand. He gave a single, short nod, a sign of ultimate respect between warriors. "Spectre," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I heard you were out." Anya finally lowered the rifle, the safety clicking back into place. The tension flowed out of her, leaving a deep, bone-weary ache. "Just trying a different line of work, General," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Finch's face contorted in confusion. "Spectre? What are you talking about? Her name is Sharma." Just then, a SWAT officer dragged the captured leader over. The gunman, seeing the general, seeing Finch, and realizing his situation was hopeless, decided to salvage what he could. "He's the one you want," the gunman spat, nodding at Finch. "Alistair Finch. He hired us. We were paid to abduct the whistleblower in Bay 5. Finch was supposed to kill him during a routine procedure, make it look like an accident, but the guy's lawyer got spooked and demanded a transfer. So Finch arranged this. He lowered the security lockdown protocols and gave us the entry codes. It's all on my employer's encrypted server." Colonel Evans stepped forward, holding a tablet. "We won't need it, sir. We pulled the audio from the gunman's comms, the ones this nurse was kind enough to acquire for us." He looked at Finch, his expression one of pure contempt. "We have recordings of you coordinating with them, Doctor, from your own office 20 minutes before the attack." The color drained from Finch's face. He looked from the general to the police officers to Anya. He saw no escape. The walls of his own kingdom had become his prison. His arrogance finally shattered, leaving only a pathetic, whimpering shell. It's a mistake, a misunderstanding," he stammered, as two police officers grabbed his arms and wrenched them behind his back. The sharp click of handcuffs was the final, definitive sound of his downfall. As they led him away, he was just a man in expensive scrubs, his career, his reputation, and his freedom vanishing before his eyes. The ER was quiet now. The last of the hostages were gone. It was just Anya, Thorne, and the quiet hum of the machines. Thorne looked at the rifle in her hands. "You're comfortable with that?" "It's been a while," she said, handing it to a nearby SWAT officer. "Some things you don't forget," Thorne said. He gestured to her leg. "The IED near Panjwai?" She nodded. "The one that got Sergeant Miller." "I read the after-action report," Thorne said. "It said you held off a dozen insurgents for 2 hours after your team was hit, protecting the wounded until evac arrived. All with a shattered femur. The report recommended you for the Navy Cross." Anya looked away. "They gave me a medical discharge instead." "A mistake," Thorne said simply. "Bureaucrats see a wound. I see a warrior who has paid a price and is still standing." He paused, his gaze intense. "The world is not a safe place, Spectre. We still need people who can stand on the wall. The Secretary of Defense and I have been trying to overhaul the security protocols for our global network of military medical facilities and research labs. We need someone to run it, someone who understands both medicine and threats, someone who knows what it's like on the ground, not just in a boardroom." He let the offer hang in the air. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact, a problem in search of a solution, and she was the solution. "It's a civilian post," he continued, "director level. You'd answer directly to me, name your terms, set up your own team, build it from the ground up, the right way." Anya looked around the ER, at the blood on the floor, the discarded medical supplies, the empty trauma bay where a good man had almost died because of a corrupt one. She had come here to escape the war, to find a quiet place to heal. But she realized the war had followed her. It was everywhere. It was in the back alleys and in the boardrooms. The only thing that changed was the uniform. She was tired of running. She was tired of hiding. She looked at her leg, the limp, the constant pain. For years she had seen it as a weakness, a mark of her failure to stay in the life she had chosen. But here, today, it hadn't stopped her. It had fueled her. It had made her invisible. It had been her strength. She met the general's eyes. A flicker of her old self, of Spectre, returned to her gaze. "I'll need a new coffee machine for the staff lounge," she said, her voice steady, "and Dr. Finch's parking spot." A ghost of a smile touched General Thorne's lips. "Consider it done, Director Sharma." He turned and walked away, leaving Anya standing alone in the quiet emergency room. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by an exhaustion so profound it was a physical weight. But beneath it, something else was stirring, a quiet, exhausted relief, a sense of purpose, not lost, but reforged in the crucible of this sterile, violent place. She was no longer a ghost in scrubs. She was a guardian, and she was just getting started. Stories like this are a tribute to the quiet heroes who walk among us, the ones whose strength is hidden in plain sight. If you believe in the power of these everyday warriors, please subscribe to the channel. Your support is what keeps our mission alive. We all face our own battles. Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for watching. The next story is loaded and ready to play. You won't want to miss it.